I'm going to be talking about MIDI. Now, if you're just starting, you're probably wondering, what is MIDI? Well, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And what that is basically, in the early 80s, musical gear wanted to create a language, a unified language, that would allow different pieces of digital music equipment to communicate to one another, like synthesizers, controllers, and computers. And in order to do that, they created this MIDI interface, or this MIDI language. Now, MIDI is not an audio signal. Okay, it does not transmit like, an analog plug, an audio signal. It doesn't do that. What MIDI does is it transmits information about tonation, the velocity of your performance, volume, panning, and a whole host of other parameters. But it actually is a trigger for communicating the information to another device. And they all understand this language.
All MIDI does is record what keys I've hit, how hard I've hit them. The harder I hit them, the louder they sound, how long I'm holding on to those keys or having them depressed when I lift them up, volume, panning, like from left to right, and things like I've got a bender and a modulation wheel on here. That's all part of MIDI, including the pedal. So when you're recording keystrokes and you actually play back those keystrokes, you can play that back on any MIDI instrument or computer. If I'm recording it on this Casio and I play it back on a Nord Stage 2 with the Fazioli piano, it's going to sound completely different, but it's going to be the same performance because it's the same keys that I'm hitting. You're either going to get the recording right from the first time, or you're going to do like 80 takes till you get it right. It's a lot of work. But if you do the same recording with MIDI, if you make a mistake, you can go into a MIDI editor. And let's say you're playing a C chord, but you hit a C sharp on the top note instead of a C. Sounds awful. You can go into a MIDI editor and take that MIDI C sharp and change it back to a C. It's real easy. So if you're doing the perfect recording, everything is going perfectly well, except for one minor note that you screwed up, you can fix that if you recorded it in MIDI.
Depending on the make and model of your MIDI keyboard, you may have older style MIDI in and MIDI out ports like this, or you may have a USB port like this. Some keyboards like this one even have both options. To use the MIDI in, MIDI out ports, you'll need a MIDI to USB cable like this. To use the USB port, you just need a standard USB 2.0 cable, which is the same type of cable often used to connect a printer to your computer. If both kinds of port are available on your keyboard, you're probably wondering which one should you use. I always recommend using the USB port if available, because sometimes there can be incompatibility issues between MIDI to USB cables, especially the cheaper ones, and certain makes and models of MIDI keyboard.
Then on a PC or Mac, you've basically got two options to connect up to your computer. So the first thing to do is to purchase a USB MIDI interface like this one. Now this is a relatively cheap way of going about things, and make sure, by the way, that you buy a decent branded one. There are lots of very cheap ones on the market that tend to work for a few goes and then fail. So the one I use is a Roland. I'd buy a decent branded IOU, and then it's very quick and easy to connect up to your computer. And the only disadvantage really of this method is that you can only use it for this one purpose, which is making a MIDI connection. So your other option is to purchase an audio interface that has got MIDI ports on it, and then all you need are two MIDI cables, and you can easily then connect your keyboard up to your computer via USB if it's a USB interface, or maybe Thunderbolt if you've got a Thunderbolt interface and got Thunderbolt ports. The disadvantage of this method is obviously it's going to cost you more, but the advantage is you can also use that audio interface to make audio recordings, whether you want to connect mics or whether you want to actually record the sound of your keyboard as well. So that's the other way that you can go about connecting your keyboard to your Mac or PC.
This is where I show you how to use these and how to connect it, but really it is just a USB cable from the keyboard into the Lightning to USB adapter, and then that Lightning to USB adapter connects directly into your iPad or your iPhone, and you are good to go. And your keyboard can be even powered, if it's not a particularly large one like this 49 key keyboard, it can be powered as well by the iPad or the iPhone. So here we are in GarageBand on my iPad here, and this is the track that I'm working on at the moment. I've actually recorded all of these parts while I've been out and about just using the touch screen. So as you'd probably know, if we tap on the keyboard icon here, we bring up our keyboard and we can play the keyboard.
But if you do have a controller, then suddenly you have a whole lot more control. Not only can we play our keyboard instrument, but we can actually play pretty much any other virtual instrument here in GarageBand. So what about a guitar? Let's tap here and go to our guitar virtual instrument, and then again, what about some strings? We can do the same thing with our strings. Let's tap on strings and go to our instrument, and then... And the great thing about keyboards, which I didn't mention before, is a lot of them that you get these days are touch-sensitive keys, which means if you touch really gently, you get a very subtle sound, or if you want something louder, you can really hit the keys hard, and the sensitivity is determined by how hard and soft you actually hit the keys.
And go to drums, sort of drum part, like a... Then it's a lot easier to play that with the keyboard than it would be to try and tap on your screen.
Before I teach you any tips, I'm gonna give you like a prerequisite tip. So if you want to select all, make sure you go Control A, like this. And if you just want to select a few notes, press Control, left click, and drag. I'm gonna be using these a lot, so it's best if you know this right now. So we have right now just an E piano, playing some basic chords, nothing special, but I'd like there to be a bit more realism to it. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna use the cut tool, which is C. And what you do is, if you click and drag across notes, it'll just cut them in half, like that. Instead of left clicking, you see this blue one, we're gonna right click, so you get this red arrow. It will cut them in half and delete the shorter half. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, we're gonna just right click from the bottom, and we're gonna just make little rolls like this. So right now it's snapping to grid, but if I hold Alt while I'm doing this, it's completely off the grid. You can just do whatever you want with this one now. So I can make it go down like this, I can make it go like this. So I just drew a melody for the 808s like this. But see, as you see, the notes are so short that the 808s are cutting off right away. And you know, I'm not about to waste all my time. Just, there's one. There's another. What you do is select all, which is Control A, and Control L. Boom, everything connects to the next note. Now there's one small problem I always find, is that, see this last note right here, there's no note to connect to. So obviously nothing happens to it. So what you should do is just put a note right here at the end, and then when you do it, it'll connect to it, and just delete that note. Okay, I just made this melody on the bells. Sounds pretty cool. Let's say I want to bring it up an octave. So all I have to do is Control A. So if you hold Control while you're pressing the up and down arrow keys, you go up octaves. And if you hold Shift while you're doing it, you go down notes, like semitones. I like this pattern. Let's say I want to duplicate another 4 bars so I can, you know, vary the notes a bit. So all I have to do is press Control B like this. And now I can move all these notes and vary them as much as I like. And you know what, maybe I want to bring it up an octave. There, ooh, look, we're comboing now. These are combo moves. The one thing I did notice, however, is that, let's say I don't have this first note in the melody. Let's say I don't have this last note. If I press Control B, it starts where this last note ends and begins where this first note begins. So see that? It started right there. I wanted it here.
And select this section here, which is the MIDI notes. I'm actually going to double click on that at the top. And that opens up what is called the piano roll.
Inside, I have this star icon selected. That means as I roll over each note, some different options appear. So if I'm right in the middle of the note, I can use that then if I hold the left mouse button down to drag the note up and down. Over here, and I select this note, I can then actually go down here, and if I'm hovering at the top of that velocity, I can drag it up and make it very loud. I'll play that. Also would like to point out here that I was using the sustain pedal. So if I click here, that is on this thing called CC64, which is where sustain is transmitted in MIDI. And if I drag that up, I can also go in and change the sustain point. The last thing I want to touch upon is called quantizing. Now, quantizing is a process where you adjust the start and maybe the end times of the notes according to specific timings within each bar. Here, and I'll select it to highlight it, and that selects all of the notes in the track. And I hit Q on the keyboard, and that brings up the quantizing interface. Now, at the moment, the resolution is set to 1/16. I happen to know that's just right. That is a way of saying if you take the whole bar and you divided it into 16, that's the resolution that the quantizer is going to use to determine where to move the beginning or the end of the note to. Now, talking about the beginning and the ending. Down here with change, we can see it's set to change start times. And you also have the ability to change the end times or the note duration. I normally don't have that set. Normally, I'm just interested in changing the start times. Now, I've set it to 1/16, and I'm going to click on OK. And you see all of those notes just shuffled around there. So if I play it now,